If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear. And this weak and idle theme, no more yielding but a dream. The Sandman, the Audible adaptation. This was something I wanted to get to anyway, but I did get commissioned this through the Patreon. Plug it up there. You can commission me to review stuff, and I am finally starting to catch up a little bit on my backlog of commissions. We'll see if that stays the case. Really hope so. But in any case, I was really looking forward to this. I'd heard nothing but the best things about this adaptation of the Sandman comic book. And of course, I love the Sandman comic book. It is one of my favorite comic book runs in history and competes with like one or two other things for my favorite completed run of a series, like non-continuing series that just goes on into infinity, like most superhero comics. Like completed, done, it is masterful, and I love it to death. And I was really curious to listen to this. Now, this is an impressive production. I think for me, my benchmark for audio dramas is Big Finish, who does Doctor Who stuff, phenomenal Doctor Who stuff. But you can tell that this had a lot more money to throw around the Big Finish. Now, Big Finish does amazing work with great, voice actors and great sound work to really bring home everything that's going on. But even in a Big Finish story, you'll usually only have 4 to 6, maybe, speaking parts, counting whatever doctor there is. Maybe up to 8 if you're lucky. If a voice actor can double up as a couple of people, because they actually work on a fairly tight budget. Whereas this has a massive, expansive cast of actually fairly top-tier talent. And they are all bringing very good performances to the table, in addition to great music, great narration from Neil Gaiman himself, whose voice is very suited to narrating this, this whole endeavor. And terrific sound effects and all of it. It is a really, really ramped up production. And this is going to be more me talking about the specifics of the adaptation and less about the Sandman itself, because obviously I know the Sandman already. What I will tell you is this is an extremely faithful adaptation of the original comics, including some things that I kind of wish might have been updated. Like Neil Gaiman himself has noted in the past that there's a little bit of bury your gaze in the Sandman series. And that's something that he's acknowledged, and I think, I couldn't source it, but I think has gone on record at least once or twice saying he wish he could change that. And so it's a little bit odd to me that this still has those elements present in the same way. And there's also some bits around, say for instance, the character of Funland, and sort of making him semi-sympathetic towards the end, which actually kind of skeeves me a fair bit. And like, I know the character's supposed to skeeve me, but I'm saying the narrative and the framing of the story kind of skeeved me a little bit. Like, he got this kind of peace, and I'm like, no, you should not have that. So there are some things like that that all true to the original, but I kind of wish they'd taken the opportunity to tinker with. They may not have been able to. I actually don't know how fully Neil Gaiman actually controls the rights to these things, because these are characters that were published by DC. So I don't know what kind of right sharing there is, and I don't know what kind of bureaucratic or copyright red tape would have been involved to actually alter in a notable way some of the content, as opposed to like simply trim or reword or add the narration, because like the dialogue is lifted straight out of the comic, pretty much verbatim. And I wouldn't be surprised if the narration is more or less an adaptation of the script that Neil Gaiman wrote for the artists for their guide in actually drawing the thing in its original form. But the thing to know about the Sandman, if you're not overly familiar, because actually you don't need to know the comic. This totally works as this can be your introduction to the world of Sandman if you prefer the audio medium to the comic book medium. Both are freely available though. So, you know, whatever one works for you, experience it some way. So there is definitely no reason that you need to know the comic in order to get this. That said, if you are planning to get into this and don't know the comic, first of all, know that this does actually take place in the DC universe, so there are references to and appearances by some DC characters, mostly second or third tier ones, not huge names. So these are characters like there's basically a cameo by the Scarecrow and the Martian Manhunter. There's Dr. Destiny, who was a bit of a D-list villain before Neil Gaiman used him for this. So those sort of things are present. This is a world in which superheroes exist. Now, that'll be less integral in future volumes because they are planning to adapt the whole thing eventually. So that really only shows up here, but that is going to be there. Other than that, they did a very good job of adapting the dream logic of the whole thing and the sort of flowing in and out of these stories. Because that's the thing to remember, is that ultimately the Sandman is not about the Sandman, aka Dream, aka Morpheus, aka the Lord of Dreams, as much as it is about stories. And you as the listener come in and out of these various stories, and there will be segments that go on an extended thing that are kind of a continuous story. Sort of the first block of stuff is the story of Morpheus himself and a period of him being trapped on Earth, and then the immediate fallout from that. But once that's wrapped up, you get a lot of much smaller, fairly self-contained stories, including one, honestly, my favorite one out of those is one that I'd kind of forgotten about. But if you've read the comic, you'll know what I'm talking about when I bring this up. Dream of a Thousand Cats. Bebe Neuwirth takes the lead part in that, and it's really good. I'd forgotten how good that is. But again, the whole thing's good. Here's something that I will caution you. The audio is much more definitively horror tinged than the comic is. Now, the comic has gothic overtones and horror elements to it in various ways with, you know, demons and nightmares and things like that, but it really is largely an aesthetic of the comic, whereas when it's audible, when it's an audio format, when it is something that, you know, you've got earpods in and it feels like it's enveloping you, it's a very different thing. So like, for example, there's a scene in a diner where on the comic book page, it's just black panels and dialogue boxes of screaming. Whereas having to hear people scream, yeah, it drives home the horrific nature of what's going on much harder than what was on the page. And if that makes you a little bit on the squeamish side, then that's just something to be cautious of and aware of. The whole thing, I think adding in things like music and the kind of atmosphere and ambience that brings also does a bit to make it feel much more like a horror style story than the comic often did. I suppose I should bring up the performances. James McAvoy plays Dream. He's great. It's not an easy part to play. You have to be sort of ethereal, almost ineffable and pompous, but at the same time gives some kind of insight as to what the character is feeling. It's a bit like trying to play Dr. Manhattan. It has to be like above and separate from humanity, but still us as a human audience have to be able to figure out at least a little bit what the heck is going on with this guy. And trying to convey all that through a vocal performance, not an easy thing to do. But he did a great job. I'm not going to run through all of the actors who are in this. There are so many, and they're all terrific. I know a lot of people have really latched on to Kat Dennings as Death, and she's good. But for me, it didn't 100% click, and I think part of it is because I like Kat Dennings, but a big part of it has to do with her looks and the combination of her voice with her mannerisms and limiting it down to just her voice. It was the kind of performance that when I hear it, I'm like, you're not used to doing just voice work and only voice work. You're used to having fuller use of all of the tools that an actor has in terms of body language, facial expression, look in the eye, and all that sort of thing. And when it's just the voice, it feels everyone's going to disagree with me on this, I'm sure. I don't doubt it. It felt slightly undercooked. Not bad. She's good. If this were a live action adaptation, she'd actually be a friggin' perfect fit for Death. But when all I've got is the voice, I don't know. It didn't quite click for me. And that being said, there are actually a number of vocal performances that I did kind of grind my teeth a little bit through, but it's for a very stupid, self-interested, narcissistic reason that I recognize, which is that the characters that I wish I could play, I was a lot more judgmental of those performances. So those would be the Corinthian, Desire, and Puck. I did not care for any of those three performances, and I strongly suspect, I actually honestly don't think Puck was very good, but definitely the other two, I strongly suspect that there is nothing wrong with the performances, and it's just I want to play those parts so much that hearing an actor make different choices than I would make that don't seem to be better, at least in my mind, because I'm egotistical as hell, it makes me go, oh, grr. Like I would find myself, I'd be driving, listening to this while on the road, and I'd hear a line from Desire, and like I would say it myself immediately after, almost like an echo, but the way that I would say it. Oh God, my ego is ridiculous. So I had a little bit of that going on. I suspect most people are not gonna have that problem. Oh my God, I am a stupid, ridiculous, vain creature. Welcome to the channel if you're new here. But it is a very impressive production, and I'm going to be really curious to see where it goes from here. And like I suppose to make the point that like it is possible for a performance to be so good that it overrides my my egotistical instincts, because I would also like to play Lucifer, but Michael Sheen is friggin' great, and I couldn't do it better than him, so I'll let that go. No issue there. So, like, it is possible for a performance to land so well that even my ego steps aside and goes, yeah, no, that's fine. But I am going to be looking forward to Seasons of Mist, to hear him come back and get to play Lucifer again. I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of the Endless, to hearing Delirium especially, and I'm excited for more of these. Of course, for me, it will always be an adaptation because I know the source material so well. And it is different enough. I think in a lot of ways, the ways in which the soundscape sort of sinks you into the storytelling, and honestly just the addition of narration, even though the story is virtually unchanged, it is a different enough experience as a way to take in this story that even if you know this story front to back, I'd still say it's worth checking out. And now that's rare for me. As a rule, if something does virtually no significant changes in adaptation, I tend to go, well, what was the point? I'm not going to do that here because just the simple shift in medium to a completely audio-based way of storytelling, the story feels different. The experience of it, even though the story is exactly the same, isn't an identical thing. Because like the Sandman's a very literary comic, but taking the written word out of it and making it a completely audio experience, it really does just give it a different feel even while being the same story. In a way that at least I have found adapting to, say, film doesn't. There's something about the imagination involved in the audio medium and just the ambience and the atmosphere of it. It can actually sink you into the story, I think, more than film usually is able to do. So that's The Sandman. It's really good. Check it out if you haven't. Have you heard it, though? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in my comments. Let's talk about it. I already mentioned the Patreon. No pressure on that, though. Like, share, subscribe. That helps me out, too. But you don't have to worry about that either. Take a relaxed attitude around here so you can come on back next time you need a break.